All right, y'all. Thanks for joining us. We're here, the new SEC podcast. I'm Randall Ledet Jr.
Hunter Zeisman here.
Hunter Zeisman here. So really excited to embark on this new season in the SEC. I live here in Atlanta, Georgia. I've been here for 4 years. I'm in the heart of the SEC. The College Football Hall of Fame's here. The SEC Championship is based here. The National Championship is going to be played here this year. The Dawgs play about an hour and a half away. And you walk outside of your home and you see nothing but Auburn hoodies and Alabama shirts. And so really excited to kind of get this going and talk about the season and really talk about a season where we're going to see things we've never seen before. So Hunter, man, what are your thoughts? And tell us a little more about yourself.
Yeah, man. I mean, you nailed it. It's going to be an exciting season. I think there's a lot of new things that are going to be coming a part of it. Alabama alumni got to see a lot of these teams play, whether it was in Bryant-Denny or in their home stadium. So I've felt some of that energy now on the outside looking in and watching a lot of the games on TV instead of being there as much as I'd like to. You still feel that energy. You still feel like we're gearing up for a great season. And, you mentioned it. We've talked about it a lot. New season, a lot to look forward to.
A lot to look forward to. And like you said, it's like even though you're not at the games, you still feel it on the TV. You feel it in that noon kickoff or that 3:30 p.m. kickoff or 7 p.m. kickoff. Night games in Bryant-Denny, in Starksville, in Columbia, at Auburn, in Mizzou. And so there's a lot of new things that we're excited about. And the SEC made arguably the biggest splash this year when it comes to adding new teams to the conference. The ACC added new teams, the Big 12 added new teams, the Big 10 added new teams, but the SEC added two of the biggest brands in college football in Oklahoma and Texas. What are some other new things that you're excited about when you look at the season?
Yeah, I mean, the addition of the two teams is huge. I think bringing in teams that have already competed, in cross-conference play. We've seen Alabama and Texas in years past. We've seen what these teams can do, and they're worthy opponents to be fitting in the SEC. And I think they'll slide right into the schedule and put up great numbers, bring a lot of fans to the games when they play. I think aside from that, another big thing new to the SEC is the head coaching changes. The biggest name in SEC football when it comes to coaches year over year is Nick Saban. There's players on these teams right now that don't remember a time when Alabama wasn't coached by Nick Saban. So I think that will be a huge change. Teams are looking to take advantage of it. We got Kalen DeBoer coming in from Washington. Huge change. What will that mean for Alabama? What will that mean for the teams that they play? I think we might see something different on both sides of the ball from them, and it'll be a big shakeup for the SEC.
I think it'll be a really big shakeup. And the Saban news coming after the national championship or a little bit before the national championship shook the entire landscape of college football. Just the search included, Kirby Smart, Steve Sarkisian, Lane Kiffin, the heavy hitters, and they ultimately did pick Kalen DeBoer, like you mentioned, NCAA championship runner-up. He's been nothing but successful and hoping to bring that exciting offense he had with Penix with Jalen Milroe. That's one of the biggest things this year when it comes to the new SEC, which opens the door for a new king to take the throne of the top dog in the conference. Is it the Dogs in Georgia? Is it going to be Bama, who is the reigning SEC champ? Is it teams that are old blood but coming for new spots with Missouri and Ole Miss probably coming in at their highest ranked spots preseason in their history? There's so many new things in Missouri, and as mentioned, Ole Miss are two really exciting teams to look at. New quarterbacks, Nico Iamaleava, finally getting the keys to the Lamborghini, the $8 million NIL Lamborghini that he's probably had for a while. We get to see what he can do. We get to see what Lenore Sellers can do at South Carolina. And we would be remiss if we didn't talk about the biggest thing that's new in the SEC. No more divisions. East, West, East having a soft schedule, West going through the gauntlet of Baton Rouge and Starksville and Auburn and and all the other schools in the West, A&M going to College Station, no matter what record they have. Like, there are no more divisions. So the top two teams with the top record will be facing each other in Atlanta. Like, what does that mean?
I think it's a huge thing. In years past, it was what team from the West is going to be playing against Georgia. having to battle for that top spot where Georgia was just fitting in there year over year in recent memory. But it opens up the door for a lot of teams, one to come into this. If they put up the right resume, they can play in the SEC championship game. You could see Alabama, Ole Miss. You could see Alabama, Tennessee. You could see Ole Miss, Mizzou. There's a lot of teams that could play in this game where, although when they play during the regular season, it's huge energy. Seeing those two teams play in Atlanta for that, what would likely be the number one seed in the playoff this year is huge. Now, even though there's no divisions, it still opens up doors for other teams that might not be playing in the SEC championship.
Yep.
In years past, you might see the SEC championship game lose or go to the playoffs. There's an opportunity for that. This year, you can get home while two teams are playing in Atlanta, and you still make it to the playoffs. You see talk, is there going to be 3 SEC teams, 4 SEC teams? If the other conferences don't look great this year, could you see 5 SEC teams go to the playoffs as almost a SEC bracket? Teams like Tennessee who haven't been able to make it, and other teams, Missouri, coming off of a great finish to the season and wanting to continue that momentum, they might not make the SEC championship game, but that's okay. The opportunity is still there.
Absolutely. And so that's going to create more competitive football going throughout the rest of the season, because you're not just playing for that New Year's Six spot, which is a great accolade, especially for Missouri getting, getting their first New Year's Six win last year against Ohio State. But now if you're that 3rd or 4th SEC team, you're looking at a 6 seed, 7 seed, 8 seed, 9 seed in the playoffs, and you have a shot to make it to Atlanta for the game that really matters, the national championship. So it's going to be a fun one. There's so many new things. And so we were excited to get this going and talk about the season. I've had a running countdown. And so this first episode, we're going to go through a team by team conference preview and give you an idea of who we see being key players and key highlights for the season, some of the key games, and our overall schedule predictions.
Yeah. And, early on, the SEC schedule is going to be filled with some out-of-conference games. Some of those great, some of those maybe some tune-up games for teams that have some changes. But once we get into the SEC schedule, there's going to be a lot of tough games. A lot of teams are running different gauntlets than they usually have. You'll see Ole Miss and Alabama don't play. Some teams are getting a bye from Tennessee when they've had to play them in years past. So we'll go through that, talk about teams and who is playing some tough out-of-conference opponents like Texas and Michigan, and where their opportunities lie to make a name for themselves and get some out-of-conference wins to strengthen the strength of schedule down the stretch.
Definitely. And those out-of-conference wins are going to play a key role. We saw it last year with Texas and Alabama and what that meant to the committee going towards the end of the season. What matters more, that win over Bama or Bama's, vastly improved eye test based upon their wins in the schedule. And you saw that win over Bama was crucial for Texas to get the 3 seed. And it was helpful for Bama to improve their resume as well as earn that 4th spot over other conferences that it may not mean as much at, right?
Right.
So we're excited to talk about it. There's a ton of out-of-conference games. And so without further ado, let's start with the first team.
Yeah.
Do we go with Texas? They're new.
We can go with Texas. They're new. I think that they have arguably the toughest out of conference schedule, having that tough game against the defending national champions. So we can kick it off there. I mean, they have one of the Heisman favorites in Quinn Ewers coming back. Lost 2 receivers to the NFL, but like they do in recruiting, they're reloading, continuing to add pieces. I don't see the offense slowing down. I don't see the defense slowing down at all. I think they're going to have a great year. Avenge their playoff, what happened to them in the playoffs last year. Although not against Michigan, they wanted to be a part of that game. Who knows what would have happened if they would have been playing them in the champ game. So I think that they'll go up to Michigan and win that one. But then they have a tough SEC schedule. What do you think?
Yeah, no, I have similar thoughts. And Quinn is arguably one of the best quarterbacks in the country. Some could say the best quarterback in the SEC. Not everybody wants to give him that crown because he hasn't faced an SEC schedule. But, going off of his performance last year, he is top 3 with Beck and Milroe. Nonetheless, I see them winning at that Michigan game. I think they have something to prove coming off of last season. I don't see Texas having to go through this adjustment period. They've always operated like an SEC program. They were always kind of the top dogs in the Big 12. They have SEC money. They have SEC prestige, SEC resources. And so this jump is just well timed with what Sarkisian has built over there. And as you mentioned, they had some key losses last year to a wide receiver with Xavier Worthy going first round to the Chiefs. But in Texas fashion, they reloaded. They got Xavier Bond from Alabama. Sorry. They also got Silas Bolden from Oregon State. They took advantage of Oregon State's, of course, transcendent dip back into the Group of Five world for now. They got Silas Bolden, and they also took Matthew Golden, Houston alum here. They took him from the U of H, but he was second team all Big 12 last year, so he's going to be a great third option for Quinn Ewers. Big defensive additions: Trey Moore from UTSA. Had over, I think, 12 sacks last year in the American Athletic Conference. And so he's going to play a really big role bolstering that D line, helping them get stops. And so this could be arguably Sarkisian's best roster. What does that mean for the key games for Texas this year? Once you get past Michigan, UL Monroe is a cakewalk, and UTSA should easily be a win for them as well. Then you get a bye week before going into the Red River rivalry. So biggest, I would say, key game on their schedule with Oklahoma. I have them winning. Then they play Georgia the following week in Austin, same weekend as F1 weekend. So if you, again, haven't got your hotel or stay, do that now. I have the Dogs winning that one, but I have Texas winning out. So other key games for them are going to be, ultimately Florida. That should be an easy win, as well as Texas A&M and LSU. A&M being the first time they've played since 2011, and Texas was the winner of that game back then as well. So ultimately finishing 11-1, but how's that compare to what you think?
I think you're close here to what I'm thinking. I could see them dropping the game against Oklahoma. I don't think that they have the toughest SEC schedule that they could have given an incoming team, whether that's to continue to build the brand. I think Oklahoma got a little bit of a tougher draw when it came to that newcomer schedule. They do have to play Georgia. I could see that being a game that they win. I have them losing to Oklahoma and Kentucky. Bit of a bold prediction there in Kentucky, but we'll get into that a little bit more. 10-2, they have a pretty high projected win total at 10.5. So you got them right over. I got them right under. I think either way, they could be in that bracket at that record. Depending on the way the rest of the conference and the other teams shake out.
Looking at their schedule, maybe we go to Florida next.
Let's look at Florida. Florida is one that has a tough out of conference on the front half. They're going to play Miami in-state game. It's going to be a tough one. People are excited about Miami this year. I think Miami has a great opportunity to do things this year, given the strength of schedule that they have. So they're going to be gunning for this game against Florida. Florida as a team, Graham Mertz coming back, fixed some of his previous issues that he had with turnovers in a more conservative offense. So do we see maybe him continuing that improvement, or do we see them maybe give up some of the reins to DJ Lagway and use him in a bit of a limited role in the offense, go for a two quarterback set? I could see that going that way. The defense was a little rough last year, so I think that that's going to be a limiting factor in them down the stretch.
Yeah, and they had some key losses transfer-wise from the defense. I think one of their top linebackers transferred to A&M to join Elko's defense over there in College Station. And so you hit the nail on the head. Mertz was definitely the key highlight from last season. Losing Ricky Parasol to the league is obviously tough, but having Mertz return as a veteran is helpful. He's got a really good mindset when it comes to this tough schedule. He was quoted in saying that he wants to play the best. So that's a great mindset in itself to have. And so the first half of the season, those key tests come quickly out of conference, Miami, and then a UCF team that's reloaded a lot. RJ Harvey at running back, KJ Jefferson, SEC quarterback now at UCF with Gus Malzahn, who we know what he does with those type of quarterbacks, Cam Newton. And so that's another big test in the swamp. If they can get through that 5-game or 6-game stretch at 3-3, pick up a win against Miami or pick up a win against UCF. And like really looking at their schedule, take care of business against A&M and Mississippi State. Now you're in a spot where being bowl eligible is in sight. You're probably still in the mix somewhat for the SEC championship, but your season's not over to that point, and that's all that Billy Napier could pray for, given how the program has looked the last couple of years.
Yeah, I think he's coming into the season probably the number one coach on the hot seat in the SEC or maybe in college football as a whole right now. And with a lot to prove on the line, they give him really the toughest draw in college football. Has definitely the toughest 5-game stretch in football with UGA, Texas, LSU, Ole Miss, and then finishing at Florida State. It's going to be a bit of a tough one there for them to win. They have their projected win total at 4.5. I have them just over that, getting 5 wins. I have them losing to Miami, Tennessee, and then dropping every game in that 5-game stretch at the end. So they finished last year 4 losses to end it out. I think they end with 5 straight losses here, go 5-8, and see a different head coach at the helm before the end of the season.
Yeah, and like I said, I mean, Vegas is usually pretty accurate for a reason. So I had them at 4-8. I had them getting wins, at A&M or A&M at home, Mississippi State on the road, beating UCF, lost to Miami for week 1, and then that Tennessee, UK, Georgia, Texas, LSU stretch is just a tough one to grind through. Maybe we see a Chris Leak, Tim Tebow-esque type setup with DJ Lagway coming in, and so. Look, this is by no means to rag or dig on Billy Napier. Florida has a ton of resources. Florida has a standard that they expect, and he's recruiting really well. I think they recruit top 30 every year. You have to win the games, and they can't afford to continue this trend if they want to be competitive with 2 powers joining the conference and what Florida expects of them, right? UCF's now Power 4. Miami is always going to be kind of hawking on their back, and Florida State's back all intents purposes, right? So Florida has to show up this year, at least get 6 or 7 wins, but I have them at 4-8, under what Vegas has, which is 4.5.
Yeah. 5, I correct, 5-7, not 5-8, but I on my end, but looking at the state of Florida, if you don't put a good season together here, what I think they're going to look at is how are we recruiting in the state of Florida with all the other teams that right now are projected to have better seasons. I think FIU is the only one with a lower projected win total than them. So different conferences, it's hard to compare apples and oranges. Of course. They just have a tough draw. It always falls on the coach's shoulders when things don't go right a couple seasons in a row. So, could be quarterback play that gets adjusted. Could be the head coach. I think that they have a tough one here. Not any fault of their own potentially.
No, and I think again, I think there is some life there. Depending on you win those games, your job's safe. Yeah. If you lose those games, it's really like, how are you losing? Or is it close? Is there some optimism? Do you come into the next season with some optimism? Like, oh, we played Ole Miss close. Oh, we played Mizzou really close. Like we were leading for the majority of the game. That obviously changes the conversation. Is not just purely wins and losses. So we'll see. So they finished their season with Florida State, but their last SEC school is Ole Miss. So how about we take the old bus over to Oxford and do a little preview there.
Yeah, no, I would love to talk about Ole Miss. I think Ole Miss is one of the strongest teams in the SEC this year. Coming back, I think this is going to be a huge leap under Lane Kiffin this year. They're keeping a lot of pieces around Jackson Dart, other than the running back and with Judkins taking off. If they can have some of their running backs fill that gap, they could, and I'm going to take a bold take here. They could go the distance without a loss. A bit bold, but this is the best schedule that they've seen in years. They don't have to play Alabama. There's no Tennessee. They miss out on the newcomer in Texas. The only thing that they really have to do is, they take UGA and Oxford, and then they have to go to Death Valley. If that all shakes out, I think that they have a pretty good draw.
Yeah, you have to bring up those points, right? The schedule is everything. Ole Miss routinely had to go through the SEC West gauntlet. Mississippi State, Egg Bowl. That's going to be tough no matter what, always. Auburn is Auburn. Home or away, it's Auburn. And then you got to play LSU every year. You usually got to play A&M. A&M, they only won by 3 last year, right? So this year, to your point, the schedule going into week 7, I mean, they're going to play Furman, Middle Tennessee State, Wake Forest, Georgia Southern, Kentucky, South Carolina. Kentucky and South Carolina can give them games, but they have more talent across the board. And it's been said on every publication, like Lane Kiffin built a lot in the trenches this year, picking up Walter Nolan from Texas A&M as a transfer when Jimbo Fisher was ultimately let go. And then really Trey Harris is arguably the first or second best receiver in the SEC. So you pair that with Jackson Dart, in his coming into this season, they do have the best team on paper. Man, I'm licking my chops wishing they were playing Alabama, because I would love to see what they could do with the best roster that Ole Miss has put together, that Lane Kiffin's put together. But when it comes to what the assignment is for Ole Miss, your ceiling is winning the SEC, going undefeated. Your floor has to be being third or fourth in the conference, and you're in the playoffs. Like that if you're not making the playoffs, if you're not third or fourth with this schedule, with your hardest SEC games being, Georgia and LSU, you can afford to drop a Georgia game. So so I have them at 10-2, losing to Georgia and Oklahoma, but you can afford to lose to Georgia. You should make the playoffs.
Yeah. There's absolutely potential for a 10-2 team in the playoffs. Losing to Georgia, in that I'm assuming you see Georgia as having a pretty strong record themselves, so that loss isn't going to look too bad on paper, right?
No.
Depending on what Oklahoma does in the year, we'll see what happens there. I just think that they're going to put too much together, especially if they come out with the momentum going into Death Valley and winning that game. I see them being a tough train to stop.
I think so as well. And it's for Lane Kiffin and for the team and for Hottie Toddy Nation, you just gotta hope that they can put together all this offseason hype and just deliver. Yeah. You beat Penn State last year in the Peach Bowl here in Atlanta, and so this season should pair well for them. And so that leads us to then talk about Oklahoma, who's on their schedule, who has a chance to get a marquee SEC win. And they got a lot of new things going on there.
Yeah, I think Oklahoma is one of those teams that it's tough to really get a read on, because there is so much new to the team, especially on the offense. New quarterback in a completely new O-line, not a single returning starter on the O-line. Defense returns some decent talent. It's going to be tough, though. Like you mentioned, they're going to have we were talking about earlier, they're going to have a tougher conference schedule. I see them having trouble on the road, coming into a schedule like this where you're playing a lot of tough teams back to back to back to back and having to travel. I could see that being a tough one for them.
Yeah, and so they haven't had the opportunity to go to Auburn yet, right? That's going to be a tough one. They have Tennessee coming to them, so Josh Heupel returning to his alma mater with something to prove, and with arguably one of the best rising quarterbacks in the country. And so Jackson Arnold looked pretty good last year in the, I want to say it was the bowl they played in San Antonio, the Alamo Bowl against Arizona. He put up a relatively good showing, and we'll see what he can deliver on. Oklahoma basically decided that we were going to ride with Jackson Arnold over Dylan Gabriel, understanding that Arnold has more eligibility. So they must see a lot in him. Brent Venables who's their head coach, has been building a SEC-like defense. He's historically beaten SEC teams at Clemson. And so I think that they have that in their favor with their defense. They were able last year to beat a really good Texas team in the Cotton Bowl. So there's a lot of bright spots to look and pick from 2023. No, Dylan Gabriel's huge, but Jackson Arnold should prove to ideally be a relatively good, successful quarterback, and it's Oklahoma.
Yeah.
So with that, when you look at their schedule, I ultimately do have them, losing to Alabama, if I'm looking at the schedule right, and then, ultimately losing to LSU to finish at 8-4. I think that's a great first season in the SEC with a new young quarterback. Some key wins being Auburn, being Tennessee, and then from there, ultimately dropping a couple games to Bama and LSU at the end of the season, which would put them one over the Vegas odds.
Yeah, and I don't think an 8-4 season would be looked at poorly by the fans or by the staff there. It's a tough stretch, having to go Ole Miss, go to Missouri, play Alabama, and then go to Death Valley to finish out the season with that one break playing Maine. Aside from that, they're going to have 2 tough games early, like you mentioned, Tennessee and Auburn. I think those are going to be the 2 that determine whether or not they have a successful season or not. If they can pick up wins in both of those games, I think they'll go over that win total. If they drop one of those, it's going to be a little bit tougher. I have them at 7-5, losing to Auburn, but beating Tennessee. We'll see. Would love to see it for them, rooting for the newcomers coming in. But they're going to have to earn it. And I think that the schedule here is proving that.
Yeah, they're definitely going to have to earn it. And like you said, it's a much tougher schedule than they gave their counterpart down in Austin, Texas, who joined with them. So with that, we're going to move to the next team, Mizzou, which is probably the second or third toughest team on Oklahoma's schedule. Let's go down to Eli Drinkowitztown.
Yeah. I mean, they have who may be, the next wide receiver in the running for the Heisman, Biletnikoff favorite, and Luther Burden. Can't say enough about the guy, but the confidence that Brady Cook has in him is going to come out this year. Star wide receiver core is returning, not just him. They were top 30 offense last year. So I expect that to grow with the confidence, with the development. Defense is coming off a strong finish to the season. They didn't give up more than 14 points in their last few games there on the season. Really put it together, returning a lot of those players. I see Missouri having a great year. They do have a couple tough games in there, but really as a whole schedule, there's a lot of winnable games, and I think that the Vegas line of 9.5 proves that.
Definitely, and like you said, you can't skip over this. Luther Burden III is a problem, whether it's in college football 25 or between the real 100-yard mark. That man is a problem. 1,200 yards, 12 touchdowns last year. I think he had 177 yards against Memphis. I mean, he just absolutely slashed up Vanderbilt as well. And he's returning with Brady Cook. They played the SEC runner-up closer than any team in the country last year. They had them on the ropes in Sanford Stadium. So a lot to build on from last season. They picked up the Georgia State running back as a transfer. He had over 1,000 yards last year. So he's set to replace Cody Schrader, who, had a great season last year at Missouri. And Drink should be excited that their 2 toughest games are Bama and Oklahoma. They have to go to South Carolina. They have to go to Mississippi State, but I have them winning those games. They finish up with Arkansas. That should be a win. That could be the Bobby Petrino head coaching game for all we know, depending on how the season goes for Arkansas. So all that lends to them going 10-2, and based upon my prediction, which puts them about a game and a half or a game over what Vegas has at 9.5 wins for the season.
Yeah, and I think you're pretty spot on there. The 2 toughest games, Alabama, Oklahoma. I think that they lose in Tuscaloosa, but I think they get it done with Oklahoma. Missouri team, it's the best they've been in a while. I think that they capitalize on it. They're going to have a lot of tune-up games leading them into the back half of the season. I think other than that Alabama game, that they're going to look strong. The offense is going to click. Defense is going to click. I think that we see them making a good run at the SEC championship.
Definitely see them making a good run at the SEC championship, and those games against Bama, how they play, win or lose, will really tell us if they're in that tier 1 when it comes to the SEC, which, I consider tier 1 right now to be that Bama and Georgia. I think Texas is right on the doorsteps, just given the way their roster set up. Ole Miss is right at the doorsteps, but the record could be deceiving given the opponents, but the games like Bama and like Oklahoma and, like an A&M and Auburn will really be telling of how powerful this team is. I don't think offense will be a problem when they play Bama. It just might be defense. Can they stop Jalen Milroe? Do they have the hosses up front that can, stop that offense? I don't think they'll have a problem scoring. I think it's just gonna be, can they get those key stops?
Yeah, no, I think it's spot on. I mean, you mentioned about the schedule being potentially deceiving, and whether it's Missouri or any team here, the difficulty is going to be that key wins, looking at common wins between teams, because the schedules are so different. You usually look at LSU, Ole Miss, Alabama, teams like that, and know that they all played one team in common. How did that play out? This year, it's tougher to judge because you don't have a team like Ole Miss having some common opponents with other teams like Alabama. How do you judge? So that'll be interesting to see, if we do have a couple teams that finish in that 11-1, 10-2, how did they really judge between them? It'll be interesting to see.
It really will be. And Greg Sankey, commissioner of the SEC, hasn't made an official announcement yet how they will determine the tiebreakers. I think there's a reason behind that. If we look back to the COVID year with the Big Ten and kind of how they did some reshuffling with the policies to make sure that the best teams are represented when it comes to the conference. So,
Right.
A team that we've heard a lot on each of these schedules, maybe they're like your welcoming entree to the conference, is Texas A&M. New things there too. A&M, College Station, Mike Elko. They're hosting Notre Dame week 1. Brand new coach. They're favored.
Yep. Brand new coach. Yeah.
Brand new coach. Brand new coach from Duke. The A&M Tex Ags folk were not having the Mark Stoops potential hire, so they bullied the administration into looking somewhere else, and they landed on Mike Elko. A lot of excitement in College Station. They're returning Connor Wegman at quarterback. You lost Evan Stewart at receiver to Oregon. It's a really big loss. And you also, you lost Reuben Foster at running back for injury, but you have to be excited about Connor Wegman. Last season, before he went down, he had 16 touchdowns and 2 picks and really showed out and showed that he could be the next, solid quarterback for A&M. And then on the defensive side, you pick up, Nico from Purdue, who had 10 sacks last year, led the Big Ten in sacks. So that's a really big pickup. And Elko's familiar with all the defensive players there, considering he recruited them about a year or 2 years ago. A lot to look forward to. But does A&M capitalize on expectations? It's something that we've been waiting to see since the year after Johnny beat Alabama. We saw it in the Kellen Mond year, but a lot of years they don't hit the mark. So what do we think about this year?
Yeah, and I think the expectations may be set too high for Texas A&M this year. It is a coach coming into his first season. While he had great success at Duke, 9-win season in his first year there, the expectation that he will do that 9-win season at A&M this year is going to be tough. Looking at the schedule, it's really tough to pick out 9 games that you can see them winning. I don't, want to talk too down on them because when they're healthy, like you mentioned before, Connor Wegman went down, looks great. The team was firing on all cylinders. They have a talented group of skill players there, but they do have 2 tests early. We mentioned it where a lot of these teams are playing their out-of-conference games early, a couple tune-ups. We mentioned with Oklahoma having some tune-ups early with Temple, Tulane, things like that. Texas A&M has Notre Dame and Florida in the first 3 games. So some teams will be looking at 3-0, where A&M is going to be looking from behind the pack at 1-2, 2-1. Really, the season comes down to what happens in those first 2 games. I mentioned it with other teams before that the momentum is going to set the tone. If they can get it done against Notre Dame and Florida, I think that they could pick up a couple more and get to 8 wins. But I'm not sure I see it happening for them this year.
Yeah, and something that we haven't really touched on and that you really mentioned is the way their schedule starts. Missouri's schedule starts with Murray State, Buffalo, Boston College, Vanderbilt. Thomas Castellanos is a great quarterback for BC. Anything can happen. Vanderbilt, anything can happen. But it's Vanderbilt and it's Boston College. A&M starts off with Notre Dame, McNeese State, and then Florida, who is looking for any possible win to win. Like, they understand the tough games in their schedule, but they're looking at A&M as like, this is a very winnable game. We are in the same plane, right? So if A&M starts off hot, they can win 4 straight with Notre Dame and beat Florida. You take care of business with McNeese State and you take care of business with Bowling Green. You don't have an App State like game last year. You're 4-0 going into Arkansas, Missouri, and now there's some justifiable optimism with where the season's going. I ultimately, in that first slate of games, have them dropping the first game to Notre Dame. I have them dropping the game to Florida. Florida fans, be thankful. This is one of the couple wins I gave you guys. And then Arkansas and Missouri also taking care of business. They hit a hot streak with Mississippi State. They upset LSU at home. They beat South Carolina on the road, and then they beat Auburn on the road to then finally lose to Texas for the last game of the season. But they finished at 7-5. So that to me is there's an opportunity for good wins. You take some of these L's, but you feel good. Okay, we beat an LSU. We beat a Mississippi State. Maybe we dropped a game we were not supposed to drop. That's been a theme of years past, and I expect that to happen with a coaching change and a roster change. To your point, I don't think the expectations on A&M are fully justified. A 7-8 win season's a good season. Vegas has them at 8.5. That's going to be tough. I mean, they're going to have to beat a Missouri. They're going to have to beat a Texas to get over 8 wins. Not saying it's not possible. They're going to have to show us something that we haven't seen recently.
Right. And whether that's coming out with momentum, with a new head coach, whether it's coming off of momentum with a win or, that coach winning them back over, if you lose tough to Florida on the road, can you get everybody back on board, pick up a big win with Arkansas and Missouri? You're back at home for a little stretch there. I have them at 5-7, not super hopeful for Texas A&M this year, but I do think with a win at Notre Dame, once we can see what this team looks like under a new coach, if they stay healthy with wins early on, I think that could change. They could pick up those wins against Auburn. I don't think that they'll have it against LSU or Texas or Missouri this year. So while not the hardest schedule in the SEC, I think it's going to be too tough for them in year one for Mike Elko.
Yeah, I agree with a lot of those. Like I said, I had them beating LSU. That was their upset. I had them beating Mississippi State. 7-5 gets you to a bowl game. 7-5 gets you something to build on. And hey guys, Connor Wegman's a sophomore, so you got time. You have the NIL resources to keep him. So the idea is to build off this season.
Yeah. So expectations are high from the fans, but like you said, a lot to look forward to in years to come. We don't want to write them off this year, but we'll see what happens. I think that they can shift things around really quickly. So I'm not saying that's a strong 5-7. It could flip to 7-5 very, very quickly.
Yeah, it could. It definitely can. And so there's another team that's playing one of the more interesting out of conference games for week 1. They happen to play in Nashville. The Vanderbilt Commodores. The stadium hopefully will be ready when the season starts. That's a key highlight, key story for the season. You're Vanderbilt. How are you feeling right now? How are Vanderbilt fans feeling right now? How should they feel right now?
I think Vanderbilt fans might be feeling a little disrespected with the expectations for the team. I think that they're excited for the new quarterbacks coming in. You get a Power 5 experienced guy, Nate Johnson. You get Diego out of New Mexico State, Pavia coming in. With that win over Auburn that he had last year, he has that experience as well. So if you wanted guys that have experience to lead the team, you got it at Vanderbilt. They have the opportunity to get a big win early. It's not a easy game by any means. Virginia Tech looks strong this year with great quarterback play ahead. But if for whatever reason they can pick up that game, that would be an absolute huge boost to Vanderbilt's schedule. I think it's a win-win opportunity for them. They're not expecting too much out of the year, but if they can pull something out there, then who knows?
Yeah, it's a huge opportunity. It's almost, it has this like FCS team playing FBS team where all the pressure's on Virginia Tech.
Yes.
And that's not a dig at Vanderbilt. All the pressure's on Virginia Tech. They're the ones that are AP ranked. They're the ones that are supposed to have this up-and-coming Baylor transfer quarterback who played well last season. They have to win to show something to the ACC is the third best conference, or they think they're second best, third or fourth, however they want to rank it. They have to win that game. So for Vanderbilt, if they're going to probably show both quarterbacks and see who kind of has the hot hand. They return, Langston Patterson, who led the team last year in tackles, 33 run stops. So they have some bright spots to focus on. The transfer era beats teams up like Vanderbilt. Yeah. They had some key losses at quarterback and wide receiver that went to Colorado. And you can sink in the transfer portal era where you don't have the funds. Players want to play now; they want to play for a certain type of team, or you can swim where you can say, "Hey, you can come here and play. We're going to get you some film, and you can still get to the league, and you still can get a bag." And Vanderbilt is trying to figure out where they kind of lay in that landscape, and then you add the academic rigor of getting into the school that makes it tough to recruit. Nonetheless, they do have some bright players they brought in. They brought in the New Mexico State tight end. I think one of the coaches on staff at Vanderbilt is from New Mexico State. So they're bringing in some good players who've played some winning football. It's just a matter of can they put it together. They get a pretty favorable out-of-conference schedule with Alcorn State, Georgia State, and Ball State. I have those as all wins. Their swing games where they'll be in it, but it could be a loss is going to be South Carolina and at Kentucky. And then they have a relatively tough schedule with Missouri, Alabama, Kentucky, Texas, and Auburn. And then you finish the season off with good old Rocky Top Tennessee. So a lot to focus on positively. Ideally, there's some close games, but I have them finishing at 3 wins. Vegas has them at 2.5.
Yeah, I think the swing games we talked about Virginia Tech. You talked there about Kentucky and South Carolina. I think Georgia State is going to be the swing game there for the line. Traveling to Georgia State there, it's definitely not a cakewalk. Georgia State, will put up a good fight there. That could be the one that swings that line and gives them 2 wins as opposed to 3. I would love to see them pick up an SEC win this year. Build some momentum, maybe keep head coach Clark Lea there for a little bit longer. Who knows what the expectations are there. But would love. I'm looking forward to their week 1 game. It's one of the few here where it's going to be potentially a tight game. The line isn't super high. It's 13.5 last time I checked. So they're not expecting Virginia Tech to really steamroll them.
Right. And the lines speaks volumes to what they think about Tech and what they think what could be coming out of Nashville with Vanderbilt. This program has promise. You're in a great city. It's a great academic institution. They had success under James Franklin before he took the job at Penn State. So it's just getting the guys in. Can these guys show out? Can they stay? Can you build on it? And like you said, a SEC win or 2 would be helpful. But this is the SEC. There's no easy weeks. There's no bye weeks. There's no Wake Forests. There's no Houstons where I went to school. Everybody is good. Everyone. Yeah. South Carolina, Kentucky, who we said are both some of their swing games, and so let's go to Lexington.
All right. I think Kentucky is going to be strong this year. I think that in the face of expectations and all of that, they'll overperform. They're not going to be a strong spot in the SEC as a whole, but they have a tough schedule with a decent spread. Teams are spread out where they're not going to have really tough stretches in there. What do you think for them this year?
Yeah, I agree. I'm very optimistic on Kentucky. Maybe it's my love of their jerseys. I like the royal blue. They do a lot of the right things. Mark Stoops is a consistent winner. Let's focus on the positives. You bring in Jamori Macklin, led the AAC in touchdowns at North Texas. Jeremy Macklin's cousin. You return Barion Brown. Barion Brown may be one of the most kept secrets in the SEC. I mean, the man is super fast. He's going into, I think, his junior year. He had over 6 touchdowns last year. And the wild card, of course, everyone's been talking about it. It's not like profound, is what does Brock Vandergrift do? Apparently, Lincoln Riley was recruiting him and Caleb Williams, ultimately picked Caleb Williams to be his guy. So he was in the same company as Caleb. He stayed on the roster at Georgia before he transferred to UK, and he's a 5-star recruit from his ratings in high school. So if he can show out, I think that Kentucky, I have them at 8-4. Southern Miss should be a win. SC should be a dub. Georgia week 3, I have that as an L. We are very well aware of Mark Stoops' challenges when it comes to beating ranked teams, whether that's at the time or when the season ends. There's a stat, I think he's like 2-28 against ranked teams over the last 30 games, which blows my mind because I feel like Kentucky beats Tennessee or Florida every year. It's just a matter of when the season ends where those teams finish. Nonetheless, Stoops is not beating these ranked teams. Kentucky's not beating these ranked teams. whether they have Will Levis, who's an NFL quarterback, or Drew Leary, who looked lost out there last year at quarterback, that's their challenge. And so I think they're able to get through this season with 8 wins and win enough games while also still not having to beat ranked teams. I have them losing to Georgia. I have them losing to Ole Miss. I have them losing to Tennessee and losing to Texas, but they can pick up wins at Vanderbilt, Florida, Auburn, Murray State, in-state, FCS team, and then Louisville, where they usually take care of business. So if they win all those games, they're probably not beating a ranked team. They drop four key games, but 8-4 still gets you in the bowl game. And you're kind of left sitting here again saying, well, what do we do?
Yeah. And I think with them, the changes on offense with Brock Vandegrift is going to be the thing to see, and where we're all going to be looking to see what happens there. But the consistency is going to be on the defense. They're returning 9 of the starters there, and they were a highly ranked SEC defense last year. They were the strong point of the team then. I think that they will be this year. And that's going to help them against teams like Tennessee and Texas, whether they win those games, because they have to play their toughest games on the road, other than Georgia. Georgia being early, we'll see if Vandegrift has the confidence, the ability to go to his old school and or have his old school come to them and get that win. But I do think that they pick up an unexpected win at some point along the way, whether that's Ole Miss, Florida, or Texas. I'm predicting that win to come at Texas. So I have them as well at 8-4.
Okay, so you got the Texas win, and it kind of gives me a shade thinking of how close the game was last year for Texas versus Kansas State. Like, there was a lot of close games Texas played in the Big 12. This is not a shade at the Big 12, but the competition is not as stiff as the SEC, and so Texas is going to have some close games, and Kentucky could be one of them with that defense. You get into the fourth quarter, it's 24-14, and it's kind of Texas just hasn't really like closed the casket yet, right? And that's where Kentucky could maybe steal one. And late in the season, maybe Texas has their foot off the gas. They're preparing for A&M. Their mind's on A&M. They're thinking this is like we got this in the bag, and so that could be a loss. I have Kentucky losing that game, but a respectable 8-4 season. As the season goes on, maybe we'll talk more about some of those breakout players and how Brock looks among that new class of QBs with Lenoris over at South Carolina and Nico Iamaleava over at Tennessee. But it'll be an interesting one. I'm optimistic like you, and maybe you hammer the over for the Vegas 6.5 win line right now.
Yeah. It could definitely happen. I mean, they're going to have to go in there to Tennessee, and I think that's a good place to go next and see what's happening there in Tennessee.
Let's do it.
With Tennessee, we talked earlier about some the out of conference games, and I think they're one that has a tough out of conference game this year. You got Nico at the helm. We'll see what he does. I have high expectations for him. But the key player I see on their team is the potential defensive player of the year in James Pierce Jr. He's going to be a nightmare for teams, a menace, and I think that he will put on a show when they go to Charlotte and play NC State. But having that neutral site, week 2, NC State, tough ACC team, that's going to set the tone for the year. What do you think for that one?
Yeah, I think that's a really interesting one. Anyone who's played the college football 25 game knows James Pierce is like Will Anderson on steroids in the game, unstoppable. And so he is poised to have a breakout season, could ultimately win and take home some of these accolades when it comes to top defensive player and top player's position. He's preseason AP first team All-American. I mean, he's everywhere. And Tennessee has a lot of chemistry. I believe in the hype train. I have them taking out NC State, but I think it'll be close. Grayson McCall, former Coastal Carolina quarterback, transferred over to NC State. NC State was really good last year. I think they had about 8 or 9 wins, and so that will be a tough one. Raleigh is a relatively close drive to Charlotte. Knoxville is relatively close drive to Charlotte, so it's the Southeast for you, right? Even though NC State is not in the SEC, it is all in the Southeast with the Carolinas and Tennessee. So that'll be an interesting one. I have Tennessee winning that. They play Oklahoma week 4. I have Oklahoma ultimately losing to Tennessee, or Tennessee losing to Oklahoma, I think.
Yep.
I think Jackson Arnold and Brent Venables found a way to pull that one out. But then they rip a couple wins with Arkansas and Florida. You got Bama, I think week 7 or 8.
Week
Remind
8.
me, Hunter. What happened last time they played Bama?
Yeah. Last time was fine, but last time they came to Tuscaloosa, Tennessee is always a tough one, right? That third weekend in October. It was always one to be looking forward to. We split the last 2 games there. So, Tennessee is one of those, a lot of teams benefited from the schedule changes where they got to take a couple tough opponents off of it. Tennessee has to retain their 2 toughest opponents that they play every year in Tennessee and Georgia. They didn't get the best draw there. So I think that those will be 2 games that they drop. And that's not me being biased against Tennessee, even though I'm looking forward to lighting up a cigar this year when when Alabama takes them out. But I think Tennessee is an 8-4 team. I think the NC State game would be the swing there. Oklahoma, Alabama, and Georgia being the 3 others.
Yeah, I definitely agree with your swing game there. I mean, they get a nice end of the season with UTEP and Vandy so that they can coast into that. But UK could be a swing game. Mississippi State, I think, is a relatively easy win. They get both of those games at home, which is nice. They get Florida at home. They get Bama at home. They got a really good home schedule. And so it ultimately leaves Tennessee at 9-3. Their win total was 9.5. So they would need to win one of those Oklahoma, Bama, or Georgia games. I don't know. Depends what Nico we get for that Georgia game at that point, 3 weeks left in the season. But I don't know where they're going to get that 10th win to go over the win total.
Yeah, it would have to be, Alabama. We're having to go to Knoxville. It's going to be tough. So we'll see what happens there. I think they're going to have a good season. Is it going to meet the expectations? I'm not sure, but they're going to be able to have Nico for another year after this. They're going to continue to develop him. They're going to see some strong suits there. I think we'll see a great quarterback play, great defensive play. But again, it's the SEC. There's games. Yeah. There's games out there to lose, and it will happen for a lot of teams.
Right. Optimistically, if you're a Tennessee fan, you win 10 games, you're probably making the playoffs. Because you got to get past a Bama or a Georgia, or maybe you even if you don't beat Bama or Georgia, you got 10 wins. You're probably knocking on the door. You should feel good, and it's a great building point for the following season. So we'll see. All right, so we've talked about a lot of teams, but I don't think we've talked about the SEC runner-ups.
Right.
They're located near someone, right?
Yeah, right down the road from you, man. I know you hear the dogs barking probably in your place there, hearing them down the road, getting ready for the season, and they have a season to get ready for. There's not going to be any time to waste because they're starting against Clemson over in the ACC. So, they're reloading on offense a little bit. They have their quarterback returning, but 2 weapons that are expected to be, day one weapons in the NFL, replacing those, playing Clemson week 1. That's a tough test right out of the gate.
It is. And Dabo, I think, is kind of tired of all the cheap shots his program's taking. Justifiably so. I mean, he's obviously done a lot in the ACC. He's done a lot in terms of beating SEC schools in the playoffs. But, the difference between the last time Georgia played Clemson, I think in Mercedes-Benz, or the last game I remember, was Georgia was trying to figure out if Stetson Bennett or JT Daniels was the guy. And they started JT Daniels. And then JT Daniels got hurt in that game. And that might have been one of the most significant injuries in Georgia football history because Stetson Bennett stepped in. And while the game finished to be 10-3, offense was kind of the woe for a lot of that season. Georgia surprisingly has been more of an offensive team this past season. They add, Trevor Etienne at running back, Travis Etienne's brother from Florida, portal era things, transferring from Florida to Georgia, crazy. They add Trevor Etienne at running back. They have Oscar Delp returning in the receiving core. and they're still loaded on defense just as ever. I think Georgia takes care of business and wins by at least 10 here, to start the season off strong in Atlanta, to take their what they believe to be their place as the top team in the SEC, and they're coming into the season with something to prove. They felt like they should have been a playoff team last year. They've probably felt like, okay, Texas has to play Oklahoma State, and these other schools have to play these weaker teams to get into the playoffs, and we're matched with Alabama to secure our number one spot. They're coming for the playoffs. They're going to take care of business against Clemson. They get a tune-up game against Tennessee Tech. And they got UK at home week 3. By no means an easy game, but they take care of business. They have a bye week 4. And then September 28th, we're seeing a game that we have not seen in years.
Yeah, regular season Alabama-Georgia matchup in Tuscaloosa. It is it's going to be a madhouse.
It's going to be a madhouse. And I have Jalen Milroe taking care of business. I think this is the coming out party for Kalen DeBoer. I think this is Kalen DeBoer's Brian Kelly beating Bama game. It will be remembered for however well the seasons go the next couple seasons. If he beats Georgia week 4, it's their conference. It means something. I think they take care of business, but this does not derail Georgia's season. All their goals are still intact. They're still accessible. So they're gonna then play Auburn. I don't think Auburn's gonna want to play an angry Georgia.
No,
at all.
I don't think any team's going to want to play an angry Georgia coming out of that game. So this is where I think that they get their strength back. Auburn, Mississippi State. I think they travel to Texas. I think that's going to be a toss-up game for them too. Whether they, depending on the team that we get out of Texas at that point, coming out of Red River the week before, could be a tough one for Texas to, come in healthy for that game against Georgia. That's going to be a key one on their schedule before they have to play Florida and Ole Miss after a bye week. So they do have a pretty tough stretch there, and don't forget about Tennessee right after.
Yep, and they got Tennessee right after. I think they have a top 10 schedule in the country when it comes to strength of schedule. Completely opposite of Miami. Unprovoked dig at Miami. Not sorry. But the buys are well timed. The opponents that they're playing in that week and looking at who that opponent played the week before is important, like you said. So Texas coming off the Red River rivalry might not be as healthy. They're already kind of depleted at running back with CJ Baxter going down in the fall camp. So that bodes well for Georgia. I have them beating Texas in Texas. They're going to win one of those two top 3 tier 1A games in the conference with Alabama and Texas. I have them beating Florida. I have them taking down Ole Miss. I think it'll be closer than last year's game. Then they have Tennessee. It's a win. That's going to be at home, so they can avoid going to Rocky Top. They have UMass. That's a tune-up game. And then Georgia Tech, which was a 3-point game last year. Very, very close. Georgia Tech is competitive. Haynes King is a good quarterback, but I have them take care of business. So they're 11-1.
Okay.
Beating the projections of 10.5 wins from Vegas.
Yeah, I could see this team dropping potentially 3 games this year, all on the road, Bama, Texas, and Ole Miss, and missing out on the SEC championship. I think Texas is going to be that toss-up game to get them to the win total. So, expect a 10.5. Texas and Ole Miss being the two their toss-ups. I think that they lose in Alabama, lose in Texas, and lose in Ole Miss. Not saying that as a Georgia hater. I think we'll see what happens there. They've had some easy schedules in the past. I think this one is going to be a little bit tougher for them, and we'll see what happens. They're re-upping, like I said, on offense, and I think the Clemson game at the beginning is not going to be too much of a competition. So we'll see what Georgia we get this year. There's another team that plays Clemson this year that we can switch over to, and that is the South Carolina Gamecocks.
Ooh, okay.
Yeah.
All right. Beamer Ball.
Yeah. Another team that we've talked about, a couple teams that don't have super high expectations. I think that South Carolina is one that's coming in with some realistic expectations with a tough schedule. They start strong and don't finish any softer.
Yeah, definitely. They have an opportunity to start strong, and South Carolina is another one of those programs in the SEC that's kind of a tweener. They've had success under Spurrier. They've had success in the past. Obviously, big names: Marcus Lattimore, Jadeveon Clowney, Connor Shaw is arguably one of the better quarterbacks at South Carolina, and they don't have the benefit of the SEC East schedule. You could call it a benefit. It hasn't been that beneficial the last couple of years, maybe 2 years ago, but they do have the opportunity to play Old Dominion week 1. Lenoris Sellers, maybe one of the most fun quarterbacks to play with in college football 25. If you watch any Cam Newton streams, he's been ripping with them nonstop. He is officially the starter. They have Raheem Sanders, who came in from Arkansas at running back. If he can stay healthy, he's a powerhouse. He's about the same size as RJ Harvey at UCF. He's a beast and a tank. So he's come off of a 1,000-yard season, so he could help with that run game. Really, the question for South Carolina is where are they gonna pull wins from those swing games? LSU, Texas A&M, Missouri, Clemson.
Yeah,
I have them losing all 4 of those. Wins, Old Dominion's favorable. Akron should be a win. Vanderbilt should be a win. Wofford, in-state FCS opponent, that's a win. It gets tough when you play Ole Miss and Bama back to back, and then you got to go to Bama.
Yeah.
Then you got to go to Oklahoma. I have Oklahoma winning that game. If Oklahoma wasn't in the SEC in their Big 12, I would still have Oklahoma winning that game because it's Oklahoma. Right. So 5 wins is under their 5.5 point spread, but there will be some high points to point to with the new quarterback for this year and going forward to next year.
Yeah, and I think we're right in the same line of thinking here. Wins are going to be very, very tough to come by for the South Carolina team. Again, tough schedule, tough run there in the middle. Nothing to make excuses about. I'm not sure that that with the schedule, with the expectations, that 5 wins is going to be enough to keep Beamer's job there. So who knows what's going to happen? And if they can pick up a couple extra wins in those swing games, Kentucky, A&M, maybe Oklahoma, if they can pick up 1 or 2 of those, we might see something different, but not super, super hopeful for South Carolina. But I think that's kind of the expectation going into it.
Yeah, they could definitely not super hot on them. And South Carolina's in that bucket where, again, what is the expectation? Like, Saban created this expectation in the SEC where if you don't make the conference championship or you're not close, you need to start evaluating if your coach is the right coach. And I don't think that same standard is set in other conferences. Like, I think, Illinois understands where they're at. And, you look at the Big 12, like, there's certain schools that just understand where they're at. Cincinnati understands where they're at. They've made the playoffs. But in the SEC, it's like every school expects to make a bowl game. Every school is expecting to have 1 or 2 8-win seasons. And so I think South Carolina's expectations are justified given how much NFL talent comes out of the state of South Carolina. And then you see what Clemson's doing across the state in a weaker conference, but still doing it across the state, recruiting in the same pool. So it'll be interesting to see what the expectation is of Beamer and what the plan is going forward, depending on how the season goes.
Yeah, absolutely. We'll see what happens there. Let's take it down to Baton Rouge.
Yeah,
let's take it down to Baton Rouge. They got an interesting schedule.
Yeah. This might be the season that LSU's gone the most under the radar that I can remember in years. Their schedule is interesting, and there's a couple key games that stand out to me. We talked about the South Carolina game. That stands out because that should be a win. They have Ole Miss.
Yeah. They
have Texas A&M. Everyone always remembers the 74-72, multiple overtime game. That's in College Station. They have Bama. Lord, I wish Texas was on the schedule. I missed that DBU matchup with Burrow and Texas at the time. But looking at their actual schedule, we're not forgetting anything, but week 1 is Southern California.
Yeah. They have to play 2 LA teams, not in LA. 2 of the LA teams, and they're not in LA for either of them.
Well, if it wasn't for Deshaun Foster, I wouldn't even know that UCLA was in Los Angeles. But thankfully, he mentioned that at Big Ten Media Days. But 2 LA teams within the first couple weeks of the season, Miller Moss is the official starter for USC. That offense usually lights up the scoreboard. LSU's offense is in the air. They lose Malik Neighbors. They lose Jaden Daniels. Gary Nussmeier waited his turn. Everybody loves these players who don't hop in the portal. Here's one of those guys. You got him. He's your best quarterback, according to what Brian Kelly thinks. And so it'll be interesting to see what they do. They're LSU, and I have them winning at USC. I have them beating Nicholls State, Thibodaux, Louisiana. The family's from there, so shout it out. South Carolina, that's a dub. They have UCLA week 4. I have them having UCLA come to Death Valley. Man, I hope that's a night game.
Yeah.
And so I have them winning that game. They have Southern Alabama week 5. So they have the potential to be 5-0. Not saying USC is a cupcake and UCLA is not a cupcake. UCLA will be easier because they lost Dante Moore to Oregon at quarterback, but they can start season week 5-0. They get a bye week 6 and they get Ole Miss week 7.
Yeah. They'll if they can get that first game stretched down, whatever happens at Ole Miss, they're looking pretty for the rest of the year. They'll have Ole Miss and Alabama, but the other games are all extremely winnable. They're going to be favored in pretty much every game other than those 2, and those 2 could be toss-ups depending on how strong that they've played in the games up to that point. You mentioned it, losing their 3 best players on offense. It's going to be tough, but behind the O-line that they had last year, if the O-line plays the way that they did and they continued that confidence, that momentum, anybody can sit behind that O-line and be successful. Where they're going to struggle is they're going to struggle on defense. I mean, they're one of from last year to this year, unless there's some improvement, they were one of the worst off teams when it comes to coverage, the coverage grade that they got in the season. Just look at the Ole Miss game that they played last year, giving up 55 points there. Jaden Daniels put on a great show, but couldn't get it done with 49. That's never a good feeling for a team. So if they can lock up the defense, that's going to be the difference in the games against Ole Miss, against Oklahoma. I don't think it's going to be enough against Alabama, but that is going to be a game in Death Valley. So really LSU controls their destiny this year. They're going to play their toughest games at home. If they can get through the beginning, they're going to be able to run the next couple games and control that. So I think that they lose to Ole Miss and Alabama for a 10-2 season. Nothing to scoff at, something that could put them in the playoffs.
Yeah. So I agree with you. 10-2 is not a season to scoff at all. Brian Kelly has tremendous expectations. His expectations are justified. It's LSU. They've won a championship just about every 5 years. They have one of the most luscious recruiting grounds in the country. Them boys love to stay in Louisiana. So I think it's justified his expectations. So 10-2 is a good season. It might not be good enough for what they want. I don't think it's a fireable season, but it's obviously not going to get them where they potentially see themselves. It'll put them on the outside looking in, waiting on the committee to make a decision without as much control, but they're still in the discussion. So I have them dropping games to, I want to say it's Ole Miss and Texas A&M, but I do have them beating Alabama. So stay with me here, Baton Rouge fans. That's a big win for you. It's I think the stretch of the schedule for Bama lends to an upset in there, and it's always tough playing LSU. I think Garrett Nussmeier hits a stride. You could tell he's poised for this moment, and so 10-2 puts them outside of the SEC championship. As we have 2 teams, at least in my side, tied at 11-1. But it does give you a good season. As you mentioned, the O-line's great. Will Campbell is going to be in the running for the Remington Award, top offensive lineman in the country. First offensive lineman to get the number 7, which is good, but also says more about how bad the defensive backs were last year compared to the past for LSU. But 10-2, you should feel good. Ole Miss is a swing game.
Yep.
Bama, I have them winning. A&M is my upset. And so that's where they stand, and that's above the Vegas total.
Yeah. That would be a great season for them if they're sitting on the outside looking in. That would likely be enough to put them in, depending on who those losses come to. If it comes to Ole Miss and Alabama, those are the two teams that I have playing in the SEC game, champion game. So we'll see what happens there. Another team that I think is going to go over their total, as much as it pains me to say it. Let's talk a little bit about the Auburn Tigers.
Ooh, war damn Eagle. Or damn Eagle.
2023, a little bit of a rough year in the passing game, right? Peyton Thorne coming back. It's going to be, is it an improvement or is it about the same? I don't know, because of the age of the team. We're looking at an Auburn team that is extremely young across the board. They do have Penn State transfer, Keandre Lambert-Smith coming in at receiver, but other than that, they're bringing in 4 freshmen in rotation. There, Cam Coleman being one of them. Really the highlight there. High expectations for that guy.
Yeah, very high expectations. He's a preseason AP All-American, 5-star wide receiver, and so that's always great. It's a lot, to your point. They have a lot of returning young guys who just haven't seen the field as much. So you should be optimistic, because it's Auburn and they recruit pretty well, but you just don't really have a ton to go off of. Peyton Thorne had some highlights last year with playing a close game against Georgia, and he also had some lowlights, in just an abysmal offensive performance against Cal. And Cal's on the schedule again, and we'll have the Atlantic Coast Conference on their chest. But for Auburn, their win total is very favorable. I think it was at 7.5 or 6.5.
7.5, yeah.
7.5. So it's doable. Some of their key games are going to be, Arkansas. You got to win that one. Oklahoma, I have them beating Oklahoma. I think Oklahoma is going to get a couple of welcome to the SEC games. And so I have them pulling that one out. Or actually, I have Oklahoma losing that one or winning that one. But they have, after Oklahoma, they have Georgia. That's gonna be a tough one. And
in
again,
Athens.
In Athens, Georgia's coming off of playing Alabama, so either they are emotionally high off a win, or they're emotionally frustrated off of a loss. Pick your poison.
Either way paints trouble for Auburn, I think, in that game.
Either way, it paints trouble for Auburn, and then they get a bye week, and you're met with the Cotton Bowl champion Missouri Tigers in Mizzou. I'm sure Missouri has like some theme for that night. Like that's probably the top selling game on their schedule, if I had to imagine. And then you have UK, Kentucky. I have Kentucky winning that one. So I just feel like the lack of guys to point to say, okay, like I know what they're going to do coming into this year doesn't bode well with my confidence. Doesn't mean players can't step up, right? Xavier Ledet was not even on anyone's draft boards last year for South Carolina, being a first-round pick. So Cam Coleman can make a big impact. Peyton Thorne could have a tremendous leap in his second year starting. I just don't see it. And then they have Vanderbilt. They have Vanderbilt bye, UL Monroe. So more or less 3 byes in a row. And then it's Texas A&M and Bama to end the season in the Iron Bowl. So ultimately that puts them at 5-7, 2.5 games under their Vegas win-loss total of 7.5 wins.
I think I'm more hopeful for Auburn. I think even though they're young, I think they looked at some senior leadership behind Jarquez Hunter there at running back. Second team All-SEC last year, 6.2 yards per carry. Strong guy in the backfield. I think that he's going to be a good anchor for that team. Slow down the game a little bit, put the ball on the ground behind a consistent guy. Hugh Freeze was in a conference and he mentioned one of the big, one of the challenges that he's looking toward is getting this O-line to mesh. And if that happens, then, we might see some good play there from the offense. Decent team. I think they might struggle on the road. We see that with teams that are younger. So I think that they drop 4 games, UGA, Missouri, Kentucky, and Alabama. 4 games on the road, tougher for younger teams to come into. I think that they are 8-4, decent year for Auburn with Hugh Freeze. Not as happy, not as much as they might like to see, but I think that's nothing to complain about there.
I think those losses are your kind of chalk. Like those are really tough opponents. You're not recruiting at that level. You're not you haven't had the time to develop at that level. You're trying to make amends with what Brian Harsin has kind of brought in, and you're still making some changes there. So that 8-4 is a great season. 8-4, you're going to continue to recruit as you've looked to do pretty well for the class of 2025 and class of 2026, and you got a lot to build on. You're not slipping further into the depths of the SEC. You are still in that crop of teams where it's still scary to go to Jordan-Hare Stadium and try to duke it out for a win. So 8-4 is optimistic. Maybe we're somewhere in the middle at 7-5, or sorry, where Vegas sees it, but I have them at 5-7. And I think that leads us to another coach who may be on the hot seat, but we'll start with the positives. Arkansas.
Yeah.
Woo Pig.
Yeah, Woo Pig. There's some positives here. I think with the return of Bobby Petrino at offensive coordinator, bringing in Taylor Green, the 6'6" quarterback out of Utah. Seems like Utah's kind of stacking the other teams with some of their talent here this year. But bringing him in, bringing back the passing game to Arkansas is going to be an interesting change. They were so run heavy in their successful seasons when they had KJ Jefferson. Now you bring in Taylor Green, you bring in Jaquindon Jackson from Utah. And, I think that if they can put it together in the passing game, then they could win a couple of SEC games. But again, low projected win total, low expectations there. What do you think?
Yeah, I mean, like I said, I equally agree. Bobby Petrino as the OC coming in is a huge positive. He brings some continuity from his previous Arkansas experience. Taylor Green is a really mobile, athletic quarterback. You could say he was the first or second best quarterback in the Mountain West last year.
Yeah, Boise State, my bad, not Utah.
No worries. And I think he led them to a Mountain West championship. So it's a pretty solid transfer. It's a big jump to go Group of 5 to Power 4, and it's a really big jump to go Group of 5 to SEC. And so his legs will not be in question. It's just going to be what can he do from the passing game. They brought in a good transfer running back. Having to replace Raheem Sanders is tough. But sometimes fresh blood is what's needed. Huge bright spot is the defense. Travis Williams is one of the best up-and-coming defensive coordinators in the country. He had this team last year top 5 statistically in defense for the SEC. And so there's a lot of opportunities where their defense can keep them in the game. And that's, I see that happening, with Auburn and with Texas A&M and Tennessee early on. Is it going to be enough for them to win some of those big games? We'll see. I have them finishing at 6-6. They drop Oklahoma State week 2. Ollie Gordon the third. I'm going to leave it at that. Ollie Gordon the third. But then they beat UAB. I have them beating Auburn week 4, so that put them at 3-1. I think that's a huge marquee win for Pittman and what you're looking to build upon. Taylor Green's really young. The running game is young, and then they have 2 tough games with Texas A&M and Tennessee, but they're both in Arkansas. I have them dropping those. They have a bye week, and then that back half of the schedule, from week 8 on, I'll have you kind of talk through and give me what you thought from your quick first go around.
Yeah, I mean, looking at it, you mentioned it. Travis Williams' defense going to be the hot spot for this team, where they're going to shine. If it wasn't James Pierce Jr., like we talked about earlier, getting Defensive Player of the Year, out of the SEC, it could be Landon Jackson this year. So, between him, they bring in Nico Slaughter, cornerback from Tennessee, getting him a little bit more playing time there, restacking that defense. Is it going to be enough? I'm not sure. Looking at that back half of that year, with LSU, Mississippi State, Ole Miss, Texas, and Missouri, it's a tough draw. I think that they pick up the win with Mississippi State and Louisiana Tech, but I think that they drop those games: LSU, Ole Miss, Texas, and Missouri. They have a favorable home schedule. They play a lot of good games at home.
Yep.
But I think with a lot of the changes, with the intensity of these teams, with a lot of them gunning for a great record and a potential playoff spot, down the stretch is really where these teams are going to turn it on, because they're going to see that the light at the end of the tunnel. I'm sitting three teams back, 4 teams back. We can make a push, and we don't have to finish first or second. We can finish 3rd and 4th and get that run. So I think they might be a victim of that with Ole Miss and Missouri. So I have them at 5-7. covering the projected win total, but not a great season.
Yeah, and still covering the projected win total. It is a tougher schedule, much tougher than what Missouri got, or maybe like what Ole Miss got in terms of a draw. But to your point, it's those teams at the end of the schedule are AP top 25 teams right now, probably playing for a playoff spot. They're going to want to really, create kind of a separation when it comes to score. And they're going to want to go out there and make it known that we are one of the top 12 teams in the country that are based upon those 11 spots are available, or the 6 or 7 spots are available after the auto bids. 7 spots are available after the auto bids. So it doesn't really bode that well for Arkansas, but like, this is not doom and gloom. 6-6 is a good season. I have them again beating LSU, which I would say is an upset, beating Mississippi State. Mississippi State is not, someone to just breeze over no matter what our projections are, and we'll get to them next. And La Tech should be an easy win. I mean, it's a group of 5 team, but Mizzou will be tough. Texas is going to be tough. They play A&M in Dallas, if I remember correctly, at Jerry World. Another neutral site game. It's been played there for a couple of years, and they had a really close loss last year. Like, I think that was when people were like, "Is Sam the guy?" I guess the hope is you have a great season, you keep Sam. Your season doesn't go as well, maybe you promote Travis Williams, the head coach, or you promote Bobby Petrino, head coach, but you got to find a way to keep one or both of those guys because they're building something special in terms of recruiting players, especially Travis, who's super young, former Auburn linebacker. Like, he's got that it factor. So if you can find a way to retain him, no matter how the season goes with a lot of wins or not, that is a big area of focus when I think about the Arkansas football preview for this year.
Absolutely. Yeah. No, we'll see. We'll see what happens there. You mentioned Mississippi State, so let's jump over to them. We got 2 more teams here to go through, and Mississippi State is one that we might be able to cover a little quick. The expectations there aren't super high, right? They're Jeff Lebby year 1. What do you think?
Yeah, Jeff Lebby year 1. Let me give you something to be excited about here in Starksville. Jeff Lebby is a Josh Heupel disciple. He has really been a pivotal piece to that spread the receivers out and run this, 4 wide, 5 wide, explosive offense. He just needs time to get his guys. And I think he did a pretty good job in the portal, picking up some guys, later with Blake Shapen, that quarterback, was a former starter at Baylor. And as well as, one of the top receivers from UTEP last year as well. They have a tougher draw, and it's just a really deep SEC. Like, if you've been listening to the most of this episode, every team has some dogs on it, and every team has some swing games, legitimate swing games. And so there is a lot to look forward to in Starksville. Jeff Lebby will be a good coach. I think they will get to a Dan Mullen level of success at some point. They're no longer tied to the SEC West, so they're not just getting the entire gauntlet every year. But when you look at their schedule, I have them beating Arizona State week 2. Arizona State quarterback Drew Allar, former Notre Dame starting quarterback that transferred over to Arizona State about a year ago. I have them taking that game. I would say that's an upset.
Yeah,
they probably won't be favored. And then I also have them beating Eastern Kentucky week 1, Toledo week 3. So that puts them at 3-0. You get Florida and Texas. I think Florida takes that game. They need that game.
Yeah.
They need it more than someone in the Sahara needs water.
Yeah.
Then they have Texas. That's Texas's, I think, first or second SEC game. It's going to be in Texas. It's going to be hot as all outdoors. And then they get a bye week and they get UGA. I think UGA takes that. They have A&M after that. I have A&M taking that one. I think that's a swing game. They have Arkansas. It's also a swing game. And they have UMass. It should be a dub. And then I'll kind of let you go through the rest of the schedule.
Yeah, I mean, I think the rest of the schedule kind of speaks for itself. Tennessee, Missouri, and Ole Miss. I don't see them performing well in those games, especially with how ragged they might be at this point in the year. It's going to be tough with the draw that they have. 4.5 win total. I don't think that they get there. I think that they get 4 wins. I think 4 is a bit of a stretch, and it's all the out of conference games. Florida could be one to toss up in the air. If they do beat Florida, that could be That could be Billy Napier's farewell tour. Who knows if they would let him go that early? But they could, not to jump back to Florida, but we'll see what happens here with Mississippi State. It's going to be a tough one to watch, just with Texas, Georgia on the road, Tennessee on the road, Ole Miss on the road, Missouri. It's a gauntlet. I don't envision this being a great year for them.
No, I definitely don't. And it's just tough bringing in all new players. The portal. You live by the portal, you die by the portal. I think the top teams are making small additions in the portal, and Missouri or Mississippi State has had to overhaul their entire offense, running back, quarterback, receivers, so that it's just going to be tough to have that continuity with teams that have been playing together for 2-3 years, and just have those connections. Even Alabama bringing in the Washington center is so helpful when it comes to having a new offense. You just try to bring some continuity, and so I think there will be a lot of bright spots. I really do think Mississippi State's got something special building here in Starksville. It's just going to be a tougher year this year, and there are those swing games with Florida as well as Arkansas that could take that total over up to 6 versus 4 and 8, which is what I have today.
All right. Well, speaking of some different changes, continuity on offense, and whatever it might look like, let's talk about the last team here on the list. Roll Tide, Alabama. Big changes. It's going to be tough to call what this is going to look like. It's we got to look at what Washington did last year, what that program looked like. Under Kalen DeBoer, it's going to be a different offense. It's going to be a different defense, for Alabama. Nick Saban was a guy who ran a very, very complex defense. A lot of players talk about it. You see it in the film. I think you see a simplified defense. I think we see more of that air raid offense that we saw in Washington last year, but they build it around Jalen Milroe's strengths. I think we see a very, very strong Alabama team this year that doesn't miss a beat.
Yeah, I think all the things you said, I agree with. And, Milroe coming into his second season. Hey, second year starting quarterbacks are very scary when it comes to the Heisman race. Jaden Daniels, second year starter. Joe Burrow, second year starter. I think Milroe is poised for a really good season. I think he has someone behind him who's extra comfortable in him. Nick Saban is still around, by the way. He's still roaming the hallways. The office might not look the same, but he's still there. So having that familiarity is helpful. They have 5-star wide receiver Ryan Williams. Will be hard to replace Xavier Bond's contributions, but it's Alabama. I mean, have they ever missed a beat at receiver?
No, never. No. And I think what's going to happen here is the way that the offense played last year versus what I think DeBoer and the offense is going to see this year is strengths is giving Milroe a different opportunity, right? More passes underneath, more flood concepts to the sideline, giving him more opportunities where it's not that take off and run or find the deep ball. He was throwing over 13 yards per attempt in air yards last year. That's way over the average. He was really hucking it out there. I think that they toned that back a little bit, give him some additional options, but still let it fly, build that confidence with him. And I think that confidence gets built with a big win at Wisconsin this year. Week 3, huge out of conference game, big statement over when we're looking at SEC versus Big Ten. We have that game. We have Michigan as the big 2 that are going to show which conference is stronger when they're coming to picking teams. I think Alabama comes in with a big statement there.
Yeah, absolutely. And then you got USC, LSU, which sounds crazy that this is a Big Ten measuring stick, considering that USC is traditionally a Pac-12 team. That's another big one, and so all 3 of those are going to matter. And specifically for Alabama, if they can go into Camp Randall Stadium and take care of business, Milroe can leave that game with 150 yards in the air, 170 in the air, maybe 110 on the ground, 1 rushing touchdown, 2 passing tutties. Maybe Ryan Williams has 6 receptions or 5 receptions for 80 yards. It'll show people that Alabama's still here. It'll be a great game to kind of build into that bye week and then that game against Georgia, where I have them winning. And so, we could talk more about that from the other side. What do you think is going to be the feeling? First of all, what time of day should this game be? Do we want a noon kickoff? Do we want a 3:30? There's so many.
I would love a night game. I would love a night game in Tuscaloosa. Fans would go crazy for it. The lights going, both teams seeing the red lights on the field would, fire them up. I'm sure. I think it might end up being 3:30. We'll see
Yeah.
what happens, when we start talking about it closer to the game. But it's going to be a good one. It's the big test, right, for Killing DeBoer. It's what all fans want to see Alabama win this game. I mean, that's self-explanatory. But if he can do that, the leash loosens up a little bit. The rest of the season starts to take a different course. You have a little bit more freedom for a loss. Not saying that they're playing to that, but when you do have to go to Tennessee, you have to play a very strong Missouri team of what I'm thinking at this point in the season. Go to Death Valley. A win here does numbers for the offense and the motivation.
Definitely. I think a win against Georgia is your pillar win for the season, and it is a tough stretch once you get past Vanderbilt and South Carolina with Tennessee at Tennessee. You got Missouri coming to you. You got a bye week. I think you had mentioned that there's like 3 or 4 teams that play Alabama off of a bye week.
Yeah.
So maybe Sankey's looking out for teams and making sure that they're at their healthiest when it comes to facing the boys in Tuscaloosa. But the season wraps up with LSU, Mercer, at Oklahoma, and Auburn, and there's no gimmies there outside of Mercer. I have LSU upsetting them in Death Valley, and then it's a straight shot from there. I think what will be interesting to see, and a lot of columnists have talked about it, is just the reaction of Alabama fans as they just watch this season. Like, I think we saw a little bit of it when Bryce Young was the quarterback, where Bama just wasn't like winning the games by as big of a point margin as they had in the past. And it seemed like people were ready to be like, well, Bama's not as good as they used to be, or we got to figure out what's wrong. And it's like, well, you're still winning. And so I think there's going to be more close games like that Bryce Young season, but I think Bama is ultimately going to pull them out. And I have Milroe as my Heisman favorite, so I expect them to really rack up yards and on the ground and in the air.
Yeah, no, I completely agree. I think it's going to be a great season. I think that there's huge potential if they can go to Tennessee, go to LSU and win. Like you said, it's going to be a different team. Fans are going to be watching on their feet for a lot of games until they start to settle in and see what this team is going to look like.
Which quarterback showdown are you most excited to watch? If you had to rank them, like top 3
in Alabama schedule or in the
Alabama schedule?
Milroe and Beck. I think that that's the number 1 for me for sure. And then I'd like to see Milroe and Nico. I think that that's going to be a good one. And then while it's not necessarily, I think I'm going to go with Brady Cook, Milroe.
Yeah, I was going to say Brady Cook as the third. You could maybe make the case for, Garrett Nussmeier and Milroe, just how he approaches that game. But Brady Cook it's something interesting to see Missouri in these discussions, with a guy who's supposed to be a dog. So I think that's every team. I think we managed to get through them, huh?
Yeah, that covers it. We'll dive in way deeper when games are coming about, really get into the ups and downs of the team as they go along. But really looking at the preview, I think it's going to be a great season. Like we said, new SEC, a lot of new things to look out for, new teams. The schedules look completely different. I know we talk so much about every single game in a schedule, but they look so different. Teams are playing people that they normally wouldn't play in a season or missing out on games that they normally would be playing. So it's important to look at. I had fun going through it.
Yeah, no, it was definitely a good time. There's so many new things, like you said, and certain rivals are not fully locked and certain games aren't being played. But when we look at the standings just at a high level, and we could talk more about it in upcoming episodes when we look at maybe SEC championship based upon our projections and playoff projections and week 1 preview. But I finished with a 3-way tie: Alabama 11-1, Texas at 11-1, and Georgia at 11-1, and that wasn't intentional because I gave them all upsets. Yeah. And so it'll be we'll dive deeper into who gets those 2 spots, who gets that 3rd spot, and then you look at LSU at 10-2, and I think I had Ole Miss at 10-2. It's like those are 5 teams at 11-1 and 10-2.
Yeah,
You're telling me, huh?
All five could do something too.
All 5 could do something too, especially Ole Miss at 10-2. So it'll definitely be interesting. And so, we had a lot of fun talking through this. If you felt like there was more that we didn't include for your team, please let us know. And we're looking forward to the next weeks coming up here once we get past week 0 and the marquee matchup with Florida State Georgia Tech of just SEC football. It's finally getting really close here, so we're excited.
Right around the door. No, fun going through this. We're going to talk way more in depth about it. Let us know what we missed, if we missed the mark on any of these. If you think Alabama isn't going to go 12-0 and you think Ole Miss isn't going to go 12-0, let me know. I'm high on those teams. So, we'll see. We'll catch you in the next one. Have more fun with this. Yeah.
Absolutely. Well, hey, thanks for everyone who's tuned in here, whoever listens to this later. This was really fun, and should be a really fun season. So take it easy, y'all.
Yep. Take care.